Hello and welcome back to the Book of Revelation, Historicist View. We are Lebanon Springs House, and this is part 25, Papal Paradise Lost. Let's begin today with a review of part 24, The Wine of God's Wrath Poured Out. Remember, we saw the first four bowls, the first one being full of sores, poured out upon those who worshiped the beast, his image, or who had received his mark. But we saw that these sores were symbolic of the moral corruption, pollution, infidelity, atheism, and the general dissolution of society that both preceded and accompanied the French Revolution, as well as the seas being turned to blood, which we also found to be symbolic of a series of naval disasters that swept away the fleets of France and completely demolished that formidable naval power of the Papal Dominion. These plagues also turned the rivers and fountains to blood, symbolizing the wars which followed the French Revolution on the rivers of the Rhine and Po, as well as the alpine streams of Piedmont and Lombardy, both regions under the influence of the papacy. And finally, we saw the fourth bowl, which increased the sun's heat, causing it to scorch men. Truly, the Italian campaigns leading to the defeat of the papal troops, occupation of papal states, the imprisonment of both Pope Pius VI and VII, and the crowning of Napoleon as emperor in France remarkably fulfilled this prophecy. This horn of the beast, France, once the papacy's most staunch supporter, but now, with Napoleon, an atheist, at the helm, it's eating her flesh, stripping her of her royal robes, and burning her with fire. These are truly stunning symbols, but what's more, these are exacting details found in history that satisfy with beautiful simplicity these prophecies of Revelation. Today, we're going to look at the fifth bowl, which is poured out upon the seat of the beast kingdom. And though this is going to be a much shorter video, that's not to say that the history is any less intriguing in its fulfillment of Messiah's revelation. And where the first four bowls were poured out upon the citizens of Babylon, this bowl is going to be a direct hit to the papacy. So let's get started. We begin, as usual, with the symbolism of these verses. Verse 10 reads, "And the fifth angel poured out his vial upon the seat of the beast, and his kingdom was full of darkness, and they gnawed their tongues for pain." So as we said before, the seat of this beast is the object of this bowl's content. But let's look at that Greek word a little closer. It's thronos, a stately seat, by implication, power or potentate, and obviously it can be translated as seat. But notice it's also where we get our English word throne. I want to make sure that we are thoroughly vetting this idea of the seat of the beast, because I happen to believe the idea is more important than we first think. Remember early on talking about the throne room in heaven and trying to envision Messiah sitting on that throne. This, of course, speaks directly to the source of authority in the kingdom of heaven. If, however, here we picture the throne room in the kingdom of darkness, i.e. Babylon, we understand better the significance of directing the contents of this bowl to the source which has usurped God's authority. This would be tantamount to unplugging the beast's source of power. And Mr. Barnes kicks us off today. The previous judgments had been preparatory to this. They all had a bearing on this and were all preliminary to it. But, he says, the seat, the home, the center of the power of the beast had not yet been reached. Here, however, there was a direct blow aimed at that power, still not such yet as to secure its final overthrow, for that is reserved for the pouring out of the last vial. All that is represented here is a heavy judgment, which was merely preliminary to that final overthrow, but which affected the very seat of the beast. We have to remember that bowls 1 through 4 fell upon those who worshiped the beast, Bowl 5 falls upon the beast himself. And let's not forget that this is the beast from the land, the papacy. Next, we're told that his kingdom is full of darkness. The word here in Greek, basilia, meaning properly royalty, rule, a realm, kingdom, or reign. Now, because I love words so much with their family roots, I saw an interesting connection of ideas in this detail. And with the help of A.W. Tozer in his book, The Path to Power and Usefulness, maybe you're going to see it too. He tells us the Greek word for king in the New Testament is basileus, and the word for kingdom is basileia, as we see in our scripture today. But he tells us these are reflected in such English words as the man's name Basil and in the term basilica, which literally means an assembly hall or royal hall. And maybe I'm stretching this just a tad, but one could ask, what agency is associated with grand cathedrals and such? Even Britannica.com supports the notion that somehow these grand structures of royalty are being alluded to. In architecture, basilica in its earliest usage designated any number of large roofed public buildings in ancient Rome and pre-Christian Italy: markets, courthouses, covered promenades, and meeting halls. In the Roman Catholic and Greek Orthodox churches, basilica is a canonical title of honor given to church buildings that are distinguished either by their antiquity or by their role as international centers of worship because of their association with a major saint or important historical event. The title, they say, gives the church certain privileges, principally the right to reserve its high altar for the pope, a cardinal, or a patriarch, and special penitential privileges that remove the basilica from local geographical jurisdiction and give it international status. My point being that targeting the throne of this beast fills it with darkness. Its basilia, its kingdom, with darkness. In other words, fills its heretofore grandeur and splendor with darkness. But what does that really mean? Well, let's look at the meaning of the word used for the expression full of darkness. It's skatuo, and it means to darken or blind, here translated as be full of darkness. But we've been referring to Babylon as the kingdom of darkness all along, so have to ask, what's the nuance here that this kingdom is now being filled with darkness? And I'll begin with pointing out that there's a totally different word in the Greek for darkness, the noun. It's skotia, darkness. Skatuo, the word used in our verse today, is a verb, and it means, again, to darken or to blind. And we have to ask if this kingdom is being blinded. This makes me think of the men of Sodom outside Lot's door, of how the angels blinded them, and they groped around in darkness or blindness. Now, it's not the same Greek word used in the Septuagint there, but the concept is certainly the same. That of the Lord blinding evil men so they couldn't prevail against the righteous. Our final symbol in this verse, that of gnawing their tongues from pain. And Mr. Barnes again highlights this very interesting phrase. This is a most significant expression of the writhings of anguish. The word rendered here gnawed does not occur elsewhere in the New Testament, nor is the expression elsewhere used in the Bible. But he says its meaning is plain. It indicates deep anguish. Well, I would certainly agree with Mr. Barnes. This beast is certainly starting to feel the repercussions of its own actions. And moving on to our final verse for the day, verse 11. And they blasphemed the God of heaven because of their pains and their sores, and repented not of their deeds. You're going to soon see that Mr. Barnes and I disagree just a tad on the fulfillment of this bowl, but his comprehension on the symbolism is unquestionable. So I'm going to let him finish this portion of today's video. He says of this bowl that it would succeed at no great interval, probably, what is referred to under the previous vials, and would be one in the series tending to the same result. It would fall directly on the seat of the authority of the beast, on the central power of the papacy, and we should look, therefore, for some calamity upon Rome itself, and more specifically, upon the Pope himself. He says this would be attended with deep distress and darkness in the papal dominions. There would be an increase of what is here called blasphemy, that is, of impiety and reproaches of the divine being. There would be no repentance produced. There would be no reformation. The system would be as corrupt as it was before, and people would be as much under its influence. Therefore, says Mr. Barnes, we're not to expect to find that the calamity brought upon the seat of the beast would be such that it would not recover for a time and maintain, apparently, in some good degree, its former power and influence. Yes, this beast isn't going down without a fight. Still, I would say that Yahweh is merely letting it expend the last ounce of strength in a tantrum, much like a scolded child. It might even be pitiful if it weren't so evil. I need to take just a moment and paint a backdrop for the interpretation of this bowl. Backdrops, as we know, are very important to theatrical performances. They literally set the stage in one swift panoramic view, and all of the characters' lines and actions are going to be projected off of that. Christine Miller's The Revelation of Jesus Christ Revealed begins to paint this for us. She says, we saw that the events of the first through fourth bowls took place from 1789 to 1815 in Europe. During approximately the same time period, the American Revolution had been won by the Americans, the Constitution written and adopted, the Bill of Rights added, and the British even waged a second war to regain the American colonies, which of course failed. Christine says, in America, there was no king or aristocracy. Tithes were not paid to the Pope under threat from the civil authority. The people were governed by consent according to the rule of law. Taxation was low and remained so. And except for the African slaves, Christine says, men enjoyed personal freedom to move about and pursue their own happiness. This state of being is so completely ingrained into the American psyche, she says we can hardly conceive of any other way of living. Well, I don't think we just suffer from a lack of world history. I think most of us don't know our own American history. And I would like to take just this moment to point out what many don't realize today. There were several of the drafters of the Declaration of Independence, as well as the Constitution, who refused to sign those documents because they did not address the issue of slavery. Still others signed it knowing that breaking free from England would lead to its abolition. And I really wish I could agree with Mrs. Miller on the point that this state of being completely ingrained in the American psyche. It's just not what I find to be true. It's clear to me that about a century ago, a paradigm shift occurred away from this understanding. Now, that being said, I don't believe that the situation is completely hopeless like many do today, I'm afraid. If you're interested in learning more on that subject, let me suggest the link below regarding biblical citizenship as put forth by real historians, people like Rick Green and David Barton. Now, unfortunately, the attempt to reintroduce our founding fathers' ideals is already being touted as the next threat to democracy. It's quite a shame, because it's essentially American history done right for the first time in over a century. But now Christine is going to contrast our history with that of European history. She says, in Europe, life was not that way. 25 years of revolution and Napoleonic wars did not produce lasting change. After Napoleon, kings and nobles were restored in Europe who were even more absolutist than before. Their fear of fresh revolutions caused them to discourage liberal ideas and reform to an even greater degree than would be usual. This, in turn, she says, caused even more unrest among the people. This state of affairs led to a series of uprisings of the people against their absolutist rulers in 1848. The wave began in France and spread to more than 50 European states, as well as Latin America, before it was over. One of its roots, besides personal freedom and the right to vote, albeit for men, regardless of class, was the desire for nationalism, the idea that people ought to be united by common language, religion, history, and geography. Let's take just a moment to look at a map of Italy during 1848. Though Germany didn't exist as such, there was a German Confederation of States formed by the Congress of Vienna at the end of the Napoleonic Wars. It was made up of Prussia, Austria, Bavaria, Saxony, and so on. Each had its duke, prince, or king at the head. The states of northern Italy were ruled by the Austrian Empire. Now that's the Habsburgs, of course, who are not Italians. Central Italy was ruled by the independent nobles as well as the Pope, and southern Italy was ruled by the French. Now, a moment ago I mentioned that Mr. Barnes and I differed upon the interpretation of this fifth bowl. In fact, I'm departing somewhat from all of the earlier historical commentators who believed that this attack upon Italy, indeed the attack upon the papacy, were just more of the same results from the Napoleonic Wars. But I'm going to side or align a little closer to Christine Miller, because I believe she better places Napoleon's ascendancy in Italy with that fourth bowl, where we saw him enter Rome, imprison Pius VII, become crowned as emperor. We also saw, though, at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, the Allied powers had actually not only restored the papal states, but much of the authority and machinery of the papacy. Therefore, I submit that Bowl 5, the bowl which decidedly stripped the papacy of its temporal and political power, was fulfilled by Victor Emmanuel II, who became the first king of the newly unified Italy as a constitutional monarchy, with Rome as its capital. And now, all we have to do is show the progression of that history. And let's first look at the dates given for the fifth bowl according to the Historicist view, 1848 to 1870 AD. And we're going to talk more about those dates in just a moment. But as to showing how this could be the interpretation of the fifth bowl, let's begin with the fact that it's focused on the seat of the beast. Mr. Barnes says, I understand this as referring to the very seat of the papal power, Rome, the Vatican to be exact. So not only does Mr. Barnes confirm our idea that the seat of the beast is indeed Rome, the earthly capital, if you will, of Babylon. John Gill, however, goes a little further. He says the seat or throne of the beast is Rome, which, when the empire was pagan, was the seat of Satan, or the dragon. And when the beast or Antichrist was risen, the dragon gave this seat as well as his authority to him. And is that city which is so often called in this book the Great City, and is manifestly pointed out by its 7 mountains on which the city of Rome stood. Well, Mr. Gill holds nothing back, as we've seen before, but it's going to be Matthew Henry who links Rome to mystical Babylon, as I alluded to a moment ago. He says, observe, number 1, where it fell, upon the seat of the beast, upon Rome itself, the mystical Babylon, the head of the anti-Christian empire. Okay, so what if we could agree that Rome is the seat of the beast? That really only makes sense if you believe that the papacy is the beast. But what hit does it necessarily take that could be the fulfillment of this bowl? Christine Miller in reminding us about the general history of Europe at this time and the rest that eluded Europeans, especially in the face of the American experiment that seemed to be respite from harm's way for the people of God. Christine tells us that discontentment engulfed all of Italy. The uprising in Italy rallied around the goal to drive out the foreign rulers, the Austrians and the French. The Pope at that time was sympathetic with the people's complaints and enacted reforms in the Papal States. Expectations of change ran high, and disappointment was sharp when the situation did not improve for the better right away. The Pope, in response, says Christine, veered more and more rightward, and when some of the Italian nobles sought to drive out the Austrians by force, the Pope refused to commit his troops to the cause, saying that he could not go to war against another Catholic state. Rioting in Rome caused the Pope to flee in November of 1848. Giuseppe Garibaldi, the Italian revolutionary, along with other reform leaders, established a Roman Republic in the Pope's absence and passed popular legislation. Christine tells us, however, inflation crippled the economy, and when the Pope appealed to the French for help, they escorted him back to Rome and his estates the very next year in 1849, where he ruled with French protection until 1870. So it seems indeed the Pope once again fled his home, but sadly, once again came right back. So this can't really be the fulfillment of the fifth bowl. Let's note again the dates framing this fifth bowl. In 1848, the Pope, as we just saw, fled Italy because of uprisings and unrest in the populace. But he's escorted back the very next year and rules fairly firmly with the help of the French protection until 1870, the date given as the end of this bowl. Clearly, we're going to be looking for events that lead up to that date, 1870, which once and for all ended his entrenchment in Rome. Now, Christina goes on to tell us that the 1848 revolutions didn't produce lasting change either, but the people became even more determined in their goals of reform, freedom, and nationalism. In fact, the short-lived Roman Republic only further unified the Italians in their nationalist desire. Christine continues, a series of uprisings and wars and counter-revolutionary actions, secret treaties, and wars by the entrenched nobility led to just 4 major Italian states by 1860. Venetia in northeastern Italy along the coast, controlled by the Austrians. The Papal States, of course, in central Italy. The Kingdom of the Two Sicilies in southern Italy, controlled, as we said earlier, by the French. And the Kingdom of Piedmont, Sardinia in northern Italy, which encompassed pretty much the rest of Italy, with the Italian Victor Emmanuel II as its king. But this configuration was not to last either. Uprisings against the French and the papal absolutist rule arose again in the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies in 1859. So Garibaldi, the hero of the failed Roman Republic of 1848, returned to Italy from exile. He led what was at first just a ragtag group of revolutionaries whose numbers daily swelled with men from the common people. His army was vastly outnumbered, and yet he won a series of key victories against the French in southern Italy. The Kingdom of Piedmont, Sardinia in the north of Italy sent troops to Garibaldi's aid in southern Italy, but first they had to cross the Papal States, which occupied central Italy from sea to sea. The Pope remained the only absolutist ruler in Italy, and his troops attempted to deny the passage. The Italian troops, however, defeated the papal troops and crossed over to Garibaldi. And at that point, it was all but over for the papacy, because in 1861, Christine tells us, the nation of Italy was proclaimed by Parliament, with Victor Emmanuel its king and Rome its capital. She says, never mind that Rome was still occupied and governed by the Pope, who opposed this turn of events. The struggle continued, and in the meantime, Austria and France were defeated in wars in wider Europe, which caused them to withdraw their troops from Italy. The Italian kingdom easily gained the province of Venice then, in 1870, peacefully marched on Rome to make it the capital of the new Italian state. Victor Emmanuel II became the first king of the newly unified Italy as a constitutional monarchy, with Rome as its capital. The temporal and political power of the Pope, says Christine, was stripped from him completely. Thus the fifth bowl of wrath, poured out on the throne of the beast, which had always been Rome, caused darkness in his kingdom, i.e., he no longer shone as the son or ruler of that kingdom of the world. Next, Christine quotes an article from Wikipedia in her book, whose very verbiage is almost apocalyptic. Part of the process of Italian unification, Rome's capture ended the millennial temporal rule of the popes over central Italy and allowed Rome to be designated the capital of the new nation. For the next 59 years, the popes refused to leave the Vatican in order to avoid any appearance of accepting the authority wielded by the Italian government over Rome as a whole. It was during this period popes also refused to appear at St. Peter's Square or at the balcony of the Vatican Basilica facing it, as the square in front of the basilica was occupied by the Italian troops. Also during this period, the popes granted the Urbi et Orbi blessings from a balcony facing a courtyard or from inside the basilica, and papal coronations were instead held at the Sistine Chapel. They tell us the period ended in 1929 when the Lateran Treaty created the modern state of Vatican City. Indeed, the beast from the land took a back seat when his realm was reduced to Vatican City. It's an area of only 121 acres, and as of 2023, a population of about 764. It's the smallest state in the world, both by area and by population. As governed by the Holy See, Vatican City State is an ecclesiastical and sacerdotal monarchical state ruled by the Pope, who's the Bishop of Rome and head of the Catholic Church. This beast, which once ruled the entire world and wielded civil authority against its enemies, not only lost all its power, but it lost its perceived papal paradise, reduced to a mere modicum of its former glory. This beast perhaps is still content, knowing he hasn't lost his ability to speak like the dragon, whispering lies to those with ears to hear, telling them, "Pay no attention to the sound of that crackling fire." But before we can revel in that sweet thought, we have one more bowl and a riddle to solve. And this concludes today's video. The next time we're together, we're going to see that bowl 5 is poured out and the Euphrates River is dried up to make way for the kings of the East. If you're not yet astonished by this take on Revelation, it's not too late. But you're going to have to forget everything you've ever heard about this part of the prophecy and keep an open mind. I might just make a believer out of you still. Join me, won't you, next time on the Book of Revelation Historicist View, Part 26, Dry Me a River. But until then, stay well, keep studying, and shalom.